Okay, so welcome to the second lecture. In this lecture, we will see how to integrate a class of functions against the Lebesgue measure. So this is going to generalize whatever you have learned in Riemann integration. You will also see that the class is much bigger. But like the last lecture, we will not get into the detailed proofs. Idea will be to give an overview of things. I will state the results, especially the limit theorems, how easy it is to interchange limits and integrals when you are dealing with Lebesgue integration. So we will see that at least in the form of theorems, and you should compare it with whatever you know about Riemann integration. In Riemann integration, you need uniform convergence for interchanging the limits and integrals, and also the class of Riemann integrable functions is not closed under limits. So if I take fn's Riemann integrable, and if fn converges to f for each x, then f is not necessarily Riemann integrable, and that actually is a rather difficult situation. So all this is taken care by Lebesgue integration. Okay, so let's go to the lecture. Okay. Um, so our aim, as I said, is to integrate with respect to the Lebesgue measure. Uh, so first we need to define the class of functions for which the integral would make sense. Okay, so just like we had measurable sets for which the Lebesgue measure makes sense, that was defined using the Carathéodory condition. Similarly, you need some measurability condition on functions for the integral to make sense. Okay, so we first define that. Okay, that is called measurability. So f from R to R, it can be complex valued also, but we will stick to the real line for these lectures. The appropriate extension to complex valued functions can always be given. Okay, so f from R to R is said to be measurable if f inverse of AB is an interval in the real line, f inverse of AB, so that is the collection of all points x in R such that f of x is in that interval AB, right? That is how we define f inverse. That is a Lebesgue measurable set. Okay, so this set f inverse AB should be a Lebesgue measurable set for every interval AB. So you pull back intervals, you should land inside the Lebesgue sigma algebra. Okay, so that is the meaning of measurability. See, this is something which we came across in the last lecture when we divided the range of f into smaller interval, and when you take inverse image, you will get some sets, and those sets should have length, right? That is how you form an appropriate Riemann like sum, and then you have to take the limits and so on, right? That is what we did. So when I pull back an interval, I want it to be a Lebesgue set, so that measure of that set, measure of f inverse AB will make sense. Okay, so that is the main thing. Okay, so well, what kind of functions are measurable? So let's look at the exercises. The first one is trivial. If I take a indicator function chi of a, so indicator function or a characteristic function, chi a at x is 1 if x is in a, 0 otherwise. So it's simply a constant function 1 on a and 0 outside. And if you look at the inverse image of under chi a of some interval, if that interval contains 1 and does not contain 0, the inverse image will be a. If the interval contains 0 and does not contain 1, the inverse image will be a complement. And if it contains 0 and 1, that is the whole range of chi a. So when you pull back, you will get the whole domain, right? So you will get R. So in all cases, you see that the inverse images are either empty or a complement, or the real line. So obviously they are all in the Lebesgue sigma algebra if and only if the set A is in the Lebesgue sigma algebra. Okay, so these are basic objects in integration theory. So sets are replaced by appropriate characteristic functions. Second exercise is you see f is a continuous function, then f is measurable. So that tells me that the class of measurable functions is a large class. So it's like for Riemann integration, you know that if you have a continuous function in a closed interval, then it is Riemann integrable. So class of Riemann integrable functions is bigger than continuous functions and already a large class, right? Similarly, here also we have various continuous functions which are measurable, and there are other chi a and things like that. We'll see a little bit more as we go ahead. Okay, so let me go down a little bit. So this is one of the basic definitions. Simple function, a simple function f. So f is said to be a simple function if f of x is a finite linear combination of characteristic functions or indicator functions. Okay, so the aj are measurable. Oh, I should have written that there. Notice that aj should be measurable. Well, for simple functions this is not necessary, but when we say simple function we assume that it is measurable. Okay, so measurable simple function, the aj should be measurable, right? We just saw that chi a is measurable if and only if a is measurable. So if you want this linear combination to be measurable, then aj better be measurable. Now aj can be made disjoint. So what I mean is you have a finite linear combination of chi aj's. Now if one or two of them intersects, let's say a1 and a2 intersect, then if a1 and a2 intersect, you can write uh, a1 union a2 as a1 union a2 minus a1, right? So that will be disjoint connection, disjoint union. And then the splits, if so, one thing you can notice is if a and b are disjoint, chi of a union b is equal to chi a plus chi b. So if you disjointify these sets, then you can write it as a linear combination of chi aj, where aj are disjoint. Okay, all the set theoretic operations land you back in the sigma algebra, right? So if you do an a1 minus a2, you are still in the sigma algebra, you are not going out. Now this is pictorially represented in the picture on the right side. So the whole space is divided into a1, a2, a3, a4 disjoint, and f equal to summation alpha j chi aj means on a1 it takes the value alpha 1, on a2 it takes the value alpha 2, and so on, right? So that is how a simple function looks like. Its image is just finitely many numbers. Okay, so it's like it's a generalization of step functions. In step functions, aj would be a interval. Okay, it's when we define simple functions, aj is not interval. Okay, it could be any measurable set. Okay, so let us continue. Now I want to integrate. Okay, so I want to integrate or develop integration, as we have seen in the case of Riemann integration. So we start with Lebesgue set, measurable set A, and then define its integral. Define the integral of chi a. So integral over r chi a dm. So that is simply a symbol. Okay, it is read as the integral of chi a with respect to dm. Okay, so this is going to be a quantity, it's a real number, and that number is given by m of a, the measure of a. Okay, so if I take indicator of the closed interval 0 1, then its integral with respect to the Lebesgue measure is going to be m of closed interval 0 1, but closed interval 0 1 is an interval, so its measure is its length, which is 1. Okay, and so on. So but the a could be very complicated, doesn't have to be a interval. Okay, it could be disjoint union of intervals, intersections, counter complements, and so on, right? So all those things are allowed. So a could be a somewhat complicated set, but recall that we had the outer measure for all these sets, subsets of the real line, which is a countably additive measure when you restrict it to L of R, and that is what we called M. So M of A is well defined, it's a positive or a non-negative number for a in L of R. Okay. Now we extend it some from chi of a. So if I have chi of a1 plus chi of a2, then I should have integral of that to be sum of the individual integrals, right? Because integral should be linear. So that essentially suggests what the definition should be. If f is a non-negative simple function, so I am assuming non-negativity, say f equal to summation j equal to 1 to n alpha j chi aj, alpha j greater than or equal to 0. So that, remember the expression for f, aj can be made disjoint, and f takes the value alpha 1 on a1, alpha 2 on a2, and so on. All these alpha j are positive. Then its integral is defined to be whatever the natural thing should be, summation j equal to 1 to n alpha j m aj. M aj is the measure of aj, right? Lebesgue measure of aj. And this, if you look at, if you stare at it for a while, you see that integral of f dm is simply summation j equal to 1 to n alpha j Maj. Maj is integral of chi aj dm, right? So you are simply taking the integral inside the summation. That is how you make something linear. So you define the integral for very basic objects like chi of a, and then extend it linearly to the linear combination of chi a's. Linear combination of functions like chi a is what we call simple function. Okay, for the time being we are defining it only for non-negative functions, then we will extend it to real valued functions. Okay, so first we define it only for non-negative functions. Okay, so let us continue. Now to extend it to all functions which are greater than or equal to 0, non-negative, we define integral over r f dm. So remember, this is a symbol, integral of f with respect to the Lebesgue measure. That is what left hand side means. That symbol is a quantity, right? The quantity is obtained by taking the supremum of something. So what are the things there? Supremum over s simple. So you run over simple functions of the kind which is greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to f. So simple function, remember, is a function which takes finitely many values, right? So the range is finite. So that is what you, and you integrate the simple function, so that we have just defined, right? Summation alpha j m a j. If s is summation alpha j chi a j, then integral s dm would be summation alpha j m of a j. So we know the right hand side, individual terms in the right hand side, you take the supremum. This may look very complicated, but it is actually quite a useful definition, and it's also something you know. So this is similar to the supremum of the lower sums. Remember, if you have a step function, so go back to the Riemann integration setup. You have a function. How do you do Riemann integration? You divide the intervals into smaller pieces, and then you look at the infimum of f in each interval, right? So you think of this simple function which takes the value infimum at each interval. Okay, so small mi. So in ai plus 1, the interval, the simple function's value is mi. Okay, then if you use the Lebesgue definition for integration, this would be mi times summation mi times ai plus 1 minus ai, and that's precisely your lower sum. And then to get the Riemann integral, what do? You will take the supremum, right? As p becomes smaller and smaller, the partition becomes smaller and smaller, you should get the integral of f. That's precisely the definition, except that now you don't stick to simply the step functions anymore, right? You are allowed any simple function. So you can take linear combination of characteristic functions of sets which are not intervals, but where they have to be measurable. So this is why the definition of the integral extends to a rather large class of functions. Okay, so let's continue. So one of the advantages with Lebesgue theory is the easiness with which you can interchange limits and integration. So there are three major theorems here which helps you to interchange limits and integration either via an inequality or as a limit. So first one is the monotone convergence theorem. So let's go up a little bit to see it clearly. Yeah, monotone convergence theorem. So let Fn be a sequence of measurable non-negative functions. So monotone convergence theorem is true only for non-negative functions. Even though you can tweak a little bit, we will stick to non-negative functions such that Fnx increases to f of x for every x in the real line. What does that mean? It means that if I fix an x in the real line, fnx are real numbers, right? So it's a sequence of real numbers that increases to f at x, which is another real number. If that happens for every x, we say fn increases to f. Okay, so as n goes to infinity, that is, so fnx is less than to f2x, less than to f3x, etc., etc., and it's an increasing sequence of real numbers, so it will converge. It may go to infinity, that is okay, but it will converge to something, right? So call that f of x. Then, well, so this is the first thing you should note. F is measurable, so that is one of the conclusions. Then if you have an increasing sequence of measurable non-negative functions, the limit is a measurable function. Okay, so this is where it already differs from Riemann integration, because when you take limits you may not get a Riemann integrable function. Okay, but here that is happening. And limit n going to infinity integral over r fn dm. So you look at the integrals of fn, that will also increase. Its limit is the limit of integral of the limit. Okay, so integral of f. So that is what is called monotone convergence theorem. So if you look at the equality, the first term and the last term, you see that the limit and the integral are interchanged, right? That is allowed if fn's are non-negative measurable functions increasing, right? So you can compare it with the theorem we saw yesterday. If an increases to a as such, then we know m of an increases to m of a. Okay, so if an increases to a, chi an will increase to chi a, as we have defined in the monotone convergence theorem. And its integrals, so its integrals are man and ma, right? So man should increase to ma. So you have already seen monotone convergence theorem when fn's are chi an. Okay, so from chi an one can go to linear combinations and general functions. Okay, so that is the idea. So generally whatever you can prove for sets, if there is some linearity involved, you can prove for simple functions, and then you can apply monotone convergence theorem to prove it for all functions, all positive functions, and then extend it to all functions. So this is the standard method one uses in measure theory, and we are seeing the very basic of that. Okay, so let us continue. So I'll use monotone convergence theorem at a later stage to give you an example, maybe in the next lecture. The next major result in integration theory is the Fatou's lemma. So let fn again be positive measurable function. So both these theorems are for positive measurable functions or non-negative measurable functions. We can, as I said, tweak it a little bit to allow little bit of negative values, but I mean generally these are unnecessary tweakings. It will be clear from the problem at hand what to do. Okay, so let fn be a sequence of measurable functions. Then both lim_inf of fn and lim_sup of fn, so I have defined them there. Lim_inf fn is a function. Lim_inf fn at x is simply you look at fnx, so that is a sequence, you take the lim_inf of that. Okay, and similarly lim_sup. Lim_sup of fn is a function, and lim_sup of fn at the point x is simply you look at the sequence fnx and take the limit superior, right? Lim_sup. So that definitions I have written, supremum, infimum, and infimum and supremum and things like that. These functions are also measurable. Okay, so these things are easy to prove. If you have fn's, then supremum is measurable, infimum is measurable, and so on. Okay, so these are rather straightforward results, which I have not written it down, but they turn out to be measurable. And you have the inequality. Integral lim fn is less than or equal to lim integral fn. Once you have this, you can prove one of the major theorems called the dominated convergence theorem. So we'll go to that. So we'll not see examples or applications of Fatou's lemma, but we'll see an application of the monotone convergence theorem in the next lecture. Okay, so let us continue. So once we have monotone convergence theorem, Fatou's lemma, and so on, it is time to extend the integral of f to real valued functions. So as of now, we have defined it only for positive functions, right, or non-negative measurable functions. Now suppose f from R to R is a measurable function. So now it is a real valued measurable function. Define f plus x equal to maximum of f of x and 0, f minus x equal to maximum of minus f of x and 0. Okay, so what are we doing? So we look at the picture on the right hand side. Wherever you see the red part, so that is f plus. So I have not written it fully. Wherever f is negative, f plus will be 0, right? So in the graph, you simply take the upper portion of the graph, the portion above the x-axis, right? Everywhere else you put 0. So that is your f plus. Similarly, f minus will be whatever is on the below the x-axis, but you put a negative to it. So both f plus and f minus are positive functions. Okay, so and you see that they are sort of disjoint, in the sense wherever f plus is positive, f minus will be 0, and vice versa. Okay, so it is easy to check that f can be written as f plus minus f minus, f of x equal to f plus minus minus fs, and modulus of f of x is simply f of x, f plus x plus f minus x. So that is a trivial thing, okay, because if f of x is positive, then you have f plus x to be equal to f of x. F of x is negative, you have f minus x equal to minus f of x, which is mod x, right? So that is trivial. Okay, what is the advantage of writing this? We are writing f as a difference of two positive measurable functions. So integral of f can be written as the difference of the integral of f plus and f minus. Okay, so let me go down a little bit. So we are defining integral f dm to be integral over r f plus dm minus integral over r f minus dm. You see, so this is what we did with simple functions, right? We defined integral for chi of a. Then if you had a linear combination of chi aj, you simply defined the integral to be the sum of the corresponding integrals. So we are extending now this to real valued functions. Write f as f plus minus f minus. Define integral of f to be integral of f plus minus integral of f minus if both are finite. Okay, otherwise you will have an infinity somewhere, and then it can be still defined if one of them is infinite and the other is finite, but let's not worry too much about technicalities. If both are finite, then f plus plus f minus also will have integral finite, and so mod f has integral finite. Okay, so that is the remark in the bracket. So this is essentially forcing the integral to be linear on real valued function. So let's just see the simple properties we have. So if I take f plus g and integrate, I will get integral f plus integral g. Okay, of course we assume that all this is finite. As I said, otherwise it doesn't really make much sense. You can still make sense out of it if one of them is finite and things like that. And if I have a constant alpha, that will come out. That means integral is linear, right? Integral is a linear map. F going to integral f is a linear map, and whatever you have seen in the Riemann integration, that integral of mod f is less than or sorry in the modulus of integral f is less than or equal to integral of mod f. So integration you should see as a generalized summation. So for summation you have this triangle inequality, right? Summation ai, if I take and take the modulus, I'll get that is less than or equal to summation mod I. Okay, so the third property here is exactly that. Okay, now comes the major part, dominated convergence theorem, one of the major and extremely useful theorem, and this also allows you to interchange the limit and summation. So let fn be a sequence of measurable functions. Now they are real valued such that fnx converges to f of x for every x as n goes to infinity. So you have convergence. There is no increasing, decreasing, anything here. Okay, these are real valued functions, and there is a g positive measurable such that modulus of f1x is less than or equal to g of x for every x. Okay, then f is measurable. Okay, I forgot one condition. G should be such that integral of g is finite. So the dominating function g should be such that integral of g is finite. Okay, I have not written it there. If that also happens, then you conclude that you can interchange the limit and integral. Okay, so let me repeat, fnx converges to f of x. There exists a g positive such that integral of g is finite. So integral of g is finite is the important assumption, such that mod fn's, so mod fn's are dominated by g. Okay, mod fn is less than to g, then integral, so limit n going to infinity integral fn is equal to integral limit n going to infinity fn, right? You are interchanging integrals and summation, the limit, if you have a dominating function whose integral is finite. Okay, that part as I said, I have not written that g has finite integral. That should be in the assumption. Okay, so this is one of the major theorems, and you will if you when you do more measure theory, you will see that it gets used everywhere. So let me go to a slight generalization of all this, almost everywhere concept. Okay, so a property P is said to hold almost everywhere if, so it's abbreviated by A dot E. If the set B where the property P is not true has measure 0. Okay, so wherever the property fails, that set has measure 0. Okay, so it's better to look at an example. So f, we will say fn converges to f almost everywhere. So if you look at all the limit theorems we had so far, we were saying fnx converges to f of x for every x. Okay, so instead of for every x, what if you have almost everywhere convergence? That means wherever it does not converge. So the set B equal to x such that fnx does not converge to f of x is such that it has measure 0. So remember, measure 0 sets or m star b is 0 or mb is 0, then B is a very small set. So what we are saying is we can essentially discard this small set. Okay, and outside B, so there is a small set B with measure 0 where something does not happen, but outside that everything is fine. For every x in B complement, fnx converges to f of x. Then we say fn converges to f almost everywhere. Okay, so you can bring in all other concepts like f is positive, or f is greater than or equal to 0 almost everywhere. What does that mean? Wherever f is not greater than or equal to 0, that set has measure 0. Okay, f equal to 1 almost everywhere. What does that mean? Wherever f of x is not equal to 1, that set has measure 0, etc., etc. Okay, so I'll leave you with an exercise here, that if f and g are continuous functions, so that is important, then if they are almost everywhere equal, then they are equal everywhere. Okay, for every x. Okay, so in all the theorems above, we can change the convergence everywhere to almost everywhere. For example, in the monotone convergence theorem, we can say fn is greater than or equal to 0 almost everywhere. So there may be some points where fn is not strictly greater than 0 or maybe even less than 0, doesn't matter as long as the point has measure 0. Okay, so the collection of points where Fn is greater than or equal to 0 should be the set of full measure. Outside that, measure should be 0. And you have convergence Fn increasing to f almost everywhere. That means wherever the convergence doesn't happen, that has measure 0. Even then, you have the monotone convergence theorem. Integral of Fn will converge to integral of f. Okay. So that's the monotone convergence theorem written in terms of almost everywhere and so on. So okay, so that's the last line is exactly the same thing. So I can stop here with a remark. So the almost everywhere concept is because the sets of measure 0 are small in the sense sets of measures. If you integrate over sets of measures 0, you are going to get 0. Okay, so such sets can be thrown out while dealing with integration. Okay, but the sets of measures 0 can be big in some other form, like remember the example from the last lecture. If you look at rationals, they are dense but they have measure 0. Similarly, there are uncountable sets which have measure 0. So they can be big in topological sense or cardinality sense, but they can still be very small in the measure theoretic sense. Okay, so I'll stop here. In the next lecture, we will compare the Riemann and Lebesgue integral.